the Misty Maelstrom. For an indeterminate amount of time, Fearsome Falls had been inhabited by a peculiar mist that would roll in every night, engulfing the town in an eerie haze. The locals had grown accustomed to it, adjusting their lives to its unpredictable presence. However, when a novel, denser mist descended upon the town, it became apparent that something was fundamentally awry. Initially, people began to vanish without a trace. Those who dared to venture into the mist never returned, and as the disappearances mounted, so did the fear and hysteria that seized the town. Soon, no one had the courage to venture outside after dark, and even during the day the streets were barren, with the only sign of life being the infrequent desperate souls searching for their loved ones. As time went by, it became apparent that the mist was sentient, and it had an insatiable hunger that surpassed human flesh. It appeared to consume everything in its path, devouring buildings and trees alike, leaving nothing but a trail of ruin behind. The townspeople were powerless against its might, incapable of fighting back against something that appeared to possess a will of its own. And the mist seemed to have a purpose, a goal that it was striving towards. And as the days became weeks, the people of Fearsome Falls realized that it was coming for them. They attempted to secure themselves inside their homes, but the mist always discovered a way in, infiltrating through crevices and cracks, suffocating those it encountered within. As the mist drew nearer, the townspeople began to lose hope. They knew there was no escape, no means to fight back against the relentless, unstoppable force that was bearing down on them. They could only wait and watch as it devoured everything they had ever known, leaving nothing but a barren wasteland in its wake. Then, suddenly, the mist began to recede, as abruptly as it had arrived. The sun shone down on Fearsome Falls once more, and the people emerged from their homes, dazed and disoriented. But alive, they surveyed the destruction that the mist had wrought, grieving the loss of loved ones and homes, but grateful to have survived. Nonetheless, as they began to rebuild their town, the people of Fearsome Falls knew that they would never forget the horrors that they had endured. They would always live with the knowledge that something malevolent lurked just beyond the mist, waiting to consume them once more, and they would always question when and if it would return. The years passed, and the mist did not come back. The people of Fearsome Falls attempted to move on, but the memories of the terror they had experienced were still vivid in their minds. They built new homes and businesses, but no one was willing to venture outside after dark. The once bustling town had become a ghost town, with only the bravest or the most foolish souls venturing outside after sunset. Yet, one evening, a group of teenagers made a bold move to confront their fears and explore the town at night. They laughed and jested, daring each other to go further into the foggy darkness. As they ventured deeper into the mist, they began to feel a sense of unease. The air grew colder, and the fog denser. Then, they heard it at the low, rumbling growl that appeared to emanate from all around them. They froze, unsure of what to do. The teenagers screamed as the mist tightened around them, enveloping them in a suffocating embrace. They struggled to fight back, but the mist was too powerful, and then, as if in response to their fear, the mist began to swirl and churn, forming a whirlpool around them. It was as if the mist had a life of its own, a malevolent consciousness that reveled in their terror. The teenagers felt their energy draining away, as if the mist was draining their life force. They thought it was the end. The mist would consume them, and they would become nothing more than a memory in the town's dark history. But then a bright light appeared in the center of the swirling mist, growing larger and brighter by the second. The teenagers shielded their eyes as the light enveloped them, blinding them. They felt a sudden surge of energy, as if their very beings were being charged up. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the light disappeared, leaving no trace of the mist or the teenagers behind. The townspeople were once again reminded of the terror that had consumed their town years before. They knew that the mist had not left, and that it was still hungry for more. They had hoped that it had moved on, but the disappearance of the teenagers proved otherwise. They gathered together, determined to find a way to stop the mist once and for all. They searched through old books and legends, looking for a way to banish the evil that had taken hold of their town. And finally they found it. They gathered together in the town square, armed with a spell that had been passed down through generations. They recited the words, their voices trembling with fear and determination. The ground shook and the air crackled with energy as they continued to chant. And then, as if in response to their plea, the mist began to recede. The townspeople cheered, knowing that they had finally banished the terror that had haunted their town for so many years. They knew that they could finally move on and rebuild their town without fear. But deep down, they knew that the mist was not gone for good. It was a force of nature, a malevolent entity that had claimed the town as its own, and they knew that they would always remember the Misty Maelstrom that had consumed their town, and the terror that had come with it. They would always be vigilant, knowing that the mist could return at any moment, seeking to claim more lives and consume everything in its path. The Haunting of Fearsome Falls. The Johnson family had been searching for their dream home for years. When they found the old Victorian house on the hill in Fearsome Falls, they knew it was the one. The house was everything they had ever wanted and more, with sweeping verandas, stained glass windows, and intricate woodwork. They moved in with excitement, eager to start their new life in the beautiful house. However, as the days passed, strange things began to happen. Doors opened and closed on their own, footsteps echoed through the halls, and eerie whispers filled the air. At first, the family tried to ignore it, convinced it was just their imaginations running wild. But as the fog rolled in each night, the supernatural activity only grew more intense. One night, they heard a loud banging coming from upstairs. Mr. Johnson investigated, but as he climbed the stairs, he felt a chill run down his spine. The air grew colder, and he could see his breath in front of him. When he reached the top of the stairs, he saw a ghostly figure standing in front of him. It was a woman, dressed in a long white gown, with her hair hanging down in tangled knots. She reached out to him, her eyes filled with sorrow and pain. Mr. Johnson ran back downstairs, shaking and sweating. He tried to tell his family what he had seen, but they didn't believe him. They thought he was just imagining things, but it was all in his head. But then they began to see it too. The ghostly apparitions, the strange noises, the unexplainable events that filled their home with terror. The family dug into the history of the house, searching for any clues that could help them understand what was happening, and then they found it. The house had been built by a wealthy family in the early 1900s, but their happiness had been short-lived. The mother had died tragically, and her husband had spiraled into a deep depression. He had spent his days locked in his study, trying to find a way to bring his wife back from the dead. But his experiments had only led to more death and destruction, and he had eventually taken his own life. The family realized that the man's spirit was still trapped in the house, consumed by grief and anger. They knew that they had to find a way to set him free, to break the cycle of death and despair that had haunted the house for so many years. They worked tirelessly day and night, trying to break the spell that had trapped the man's spirit. And finally, after months of searching, they found the key. They performed a ritual, reciting ancient incantations and burning sage, and slowly but surely, the ghostly apparitions began to fade away. As time passed, the Johnson family felt a sense of relief as the haunting slowly dissipated. But as they tried to move on, they soon realized that the darkness that had taken hold of their home had left its mark on them. They began to experience strange dreams and visions, as if they were being pulled back into the haunting once again. As they delved deeper into the history of Fearsome Falls, they discovered that the town itself was cursed. The mist that rolled in each night was not just a natural occurrence, but the manifestation of the evil that had taken hold of the town. The mist was alive, and it hungered for the souls of the living. The Johnson family knew that they had to act fast if they wanted to protect themselves and the town from the Misty Maelstrom. They gathered the townspeople, telling them of the curse that had plagued Fearsome Falls for generations together. They began to perform rituals and incantations, trying to banish the mist and break the curse once and for all. As they performed the rituals, the mist grew thicker and more aggressive, causing fear and panic among the townspeople. But the Johnson family remained steadfast, leading a community in their efforts to dispel the curse. They knew that they had to remain focused and determined if they were going to succeed. And suddenly, a powerful gust of wind swept through the town, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. The mist began to swirl and churn, revealing a dark figure at its center. The figure was tall and imposing, with glowing red eyes and a sinister aura. The townspeople gasped in terror, but the Johnson family stood their ground. They knew that they were facing the source of the curse and that they had to confront it head-on. With a fierce determination, they stepped forward, chanting ancient incantations and brandishing powerful talismans. The figure let out a blood-curdling scream, and the mist began to dissipate, revealing a beautiful waterfall that sparkled in the sunlight. The curse had been broken, and Fearsome Falls was safe once again. The townspeople cheered, and the Johnson family was hailed as heroes. From that day forward, they were known as the protectors of Fearsome Falls, and their bravery and determination inspired generations to come. The curse had been broken, and the Misty Maelstrom was never seen again. The curse of Fearsome Falls. The motley group of intrepid teenagers had always been drawn to the enigmatic, the arcane, the inscrutable, seeking out the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadowy crevices of the world. So when they heard about the legend of Fearsome Falls, a shrouded town steeped in curses and plagued by the unknown, they couldn't resist the overwhelming temptation to explore its secrets for themselves. As they arrived in Fearsome Falls, A sudden shiver ran down their spines as if the very atmosphere of the town was conspiring against them. The mist that enveloped the town seemed to have a life of its own, swirling and dancing in unnatural, almost choreographed patterns. They tried to dismiss it as a mere trick of the mind, assuming that their imaginations were playing tricks on them. However, as they attempted to leave the town, they discovered that something was decidedly wrong. The fog seemed to be cunningly steering them away from the exits, driving them inexorably deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the cursed town. They struggled to resist it, but it was as if the fog had taken on a consciousness and was intentionally leading them astray. As they delved further into the heart of the town, they began to uncover the eerie and sinister secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface. They discovered that the curse of Fearsome Falls was all too real, and that those who entered the town were fated to remain there, trapped and entangled in the curse's insidious grip forever. The town's inhabitants were strange, aloof and distant, as if they were inhabiting a parallel dimension that defied explanation. They issued a warning to the hapless teenagers, imploring them to leave before it was too late. But it was as if the curse had permeated their very beings, leaving them helpless to resist its allure. As the days stretched into eternity, the teenagers were overcome by a growing sense of despair and hopelessness. They knew that they were ensnared in the clutches of the cursed town, and that their escape was all but impossible. The fog thickened, blackened, and grew increasingly ominous with each passing day, and they knew that their time was running out. They gradually uncovered the source of the curse, an ancient artifact hidden deep within the heart of Fearsome Falls, used in a ritual that had gone terribly awry, unleashing a blight that had plagued the town for generations. The teenagers knew that they had to destroy the artifact if they were to shatter the curse and liberate themselves from the town's grasp. Engaged in a grueling battle, navigating through the fog, contending with the phantom apparitions and malevolent demons that stood in their path. After an epic confrontation, then, they finally discovered and destroyed the artifact. As they destroyed the artifact, they were engulfed by a burst of energy that banished the fog and shattered the curse of Fearsome Falls. The teenagers were finally able to leave the town, but they knew that they would never be able to forget the horrors that they had endured. All the curse of Fearsome Falls had been eradicated. They knew that they would always carry a piece of the town with them, and they understood that they would always be inexorably drawn to the darkness, seeking out the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows, despite the innumerable perils that lay ahead. Years passed, and the teenagers grew into adulthood, but they never forgot about the curse of Fearsome Falls. They had endeavored to forget, but the memories of that harrowing experience had remained indelibly etched into their psyches. Despite their efforts to move on, they found themselves inevitably and inexorably drawn back to the cursed town of Fearsome Falls. The allure of the unknown, the thrill of danger, and the call of the darkness were too strong to resist. As they made their way back to the town, they could feel the familiar chill creeping up their spines. The fog that shrouded the town was just as thick and sinister as they remembered. It seemed to be alive, pulsing and shifting in unnatural ways, but this time they were prepared. They had learned from their past mistakes, and they had come armed with knowledge and determination. They knew that the curse of Fearsome Falls was not a mere legend, but a very real and very powerful force. They had seen its effects firsthand, and they knew that breaking it would not be easy. They delved deep into the town's history, scouring ancient texts and speaking with the few remaining townspeople who had not been consumed by the curse. They pieced together the true story of the cursed town, and they discovered the source of its power. It was a dark and ancient force, older than time itself. It had been unleashed by a group of cultists who had sought to harness its power for their own twisted purposes. But the cultists had underestimated the force they had unleashed. The curse had grown out of control, consuming the town and its people, trapping them forever in a cycle of despair and darkness. The teenagers knew that breaking the curse would require a great sacrifice. They would have to confront the dark force head-on, and they would have to risk everything to destroy it. Armed with weapons forged from silver and iron, they made their way deep into the heart of Fearsome Falls. They battled their way through legions of demons and ghosts, fighting for every inch of ground. At last, they reached the center of the town, where the source of the curse lay waiting. It was a black and writhing mass of energy pulsing with a sickly glow. The teenagers knew that they had to act quickly. They charged forward, weapons at the ready, and plunged them into the heart of the curse. There was a blinding flash of light, and the curse was shattered. The darkness that had consumed Fearsome Falls was banished, and the town was bathed in the warm light of the sun. The teenagers knew that they had succeeded, but they also knew that their journey was far from over. seen things that no human should ever have to see, and they had faced dangers that few could ever imagine. But they had emerged from the darkness stronger and wiser, with a newfound respect for the power of the unknown. And they knew that they would always be drawn to the darkness, seeking out the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows. As they walked away from Fearsome Falls, they knew that they had truly conquered their fear, and they knew that they would always be ready to face whatever darkness the world might throw their way. The Fogbound Ferry. The ferry was shrouded in a dense, impenetrable fog that seemed to have a life of its own, snaking its way into every nook and cranny of the boat. The passengers, rendered almost blind by the mist, could barely see more than a few feet in front of them, and the sound of the waves slamming against the hull was the only thing that broke the eerie silence. As time dragged on, the passengers started to vanish one by one, causing the remaining passengers to grow increasingly anxious and apprehensive. The crew attempted to dismiss their concerns, but their voices were strained and their faces were ashen, betraying their fear. The fog persisted, wrapping itself around the ship like a boa constrictor, choking and suffocating the passengers with its thickness. The remaining passengers frantically searched for a way off the ferry, but all the exits were sealed shut, leaving them stranded in the middle of the foggy abyss. As the days dragged on, their hopelessness and desperation mounted, and they began to fear for their very lives. The crew had disappeared, and the few remaining passengers were left to fend for themselves against the relentless, all-consuming fog. Eventually, only a handful of passengers remained, clinging to each other for comfort and support as the fog closed in around them. They had no choice but to accept their fate and wait for the inevitable. But then, as suddenly as it had descended upon them, the fog began to dissipate, revealing the shoreline of Fearsome Falls. The passengers disembarked, exhausted and dazed, unsure of what they had just experienced. As they stumbled through the empty streets of Fearsome Falls, their unease mounted, and they began to hear strange whispers in the fog. Their fear grew with every step they took, as the fog seemed to be closing in on them, making it almost impossible to see. In the midst of their terror, one of the passengers let out a blood-curdling scream, alerting the others to the presence of something not quite human lurking in the mist. The passengers fled, pursued by shadows and the ever-present whispers. Finally, they came upon a small house, the only sign of life they had encountered since arriving in Fearsome Falls. But as the door creaked open, they realized with a jolt that they had been lured into a trap, and it was too late to turn back. As the fog enveloped them once more, they realized that they had never truly escaped the ferry. The fog had followed them, and it was now clear that it would never release them from its grip. The passengers were trapped in Fearsome Falls, with no way out and no one to turn to. They huddled together in this small house, listening to the whispers and the shuffling footsteps outside. They knew that they couldn't stay there forever. The house offered no protection against the fog or whatever lay outside. They had to find a way to escape. But how? One of the passengers suggested that they make a run for it, to try and get out of town before the fog swallowed them up again. But the others quickly shot down the idea, knowing that it was too risky. Another passenger suggested that they band together and fight back against whatever was out there in the fog. But they had no weapons and no idea what they were up against. They were stuck, trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. The fog had taken everything from them, and now it seemed determined to take their lives as well. As the hours ticked by, the passengers grew more and more desperate. They had no food or water, and the fear was beginning to consume them. But then suddenly, a glimmer of hope appeared. One of the passengers noticed a small boat tied up at the dock, just a short distance away. They couldn't believe their luck. It was their chance to escape, to leave Fearsome Falls behind and never look back. They hurried to the boat, untied it, and climbed aboard. As they pushed off from the dock, they could feel the fog closing in on them, trying to pull them back. But they were determined to make it out alive. They rowed with all their strength, ignoring the pain and exhaustion. They could see the shoreline growing closer, and they knew that they were almost there. And then, just as they were about to reach safety, the fog swallowed them up once again. They screamed and cried out, their hope turning to despair. They had come so far, only to be pulled back into the nightmare. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the fog began to lift. They could see the shoreline, the trees, the blue sky. They had made it out. They collapsed onto the shore, exhausted and relieved. They looked around, trying to take in what had happened to them. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had to get out of there, to find help and safety. They stumbled through the woods, still feeling the effects of the fog. And then they saw it, a small cabin in the distance, with smoke rising from the chimney. They ran towards it, hoping against hope that someone was inside. As they burst through the door, they saw an old man sitting by the fire. He looked up at them, surprised and wary. They explained everything that had happened to them, about the ferry Fearsome Falls, the fog. The old man listened, nodding slowly. And then he spoke. He told them that they were lucky to have made it out alive, that the fog was a curse, a punishment for the sins of the past. The passengers listened, transfixed. They had never heard anything like it. But as they looked around the cabin, they realized that there was something strange about it. The walls were covered in strange symbols and markings, and there was a faint smell of something rotten in the air. They began to feel uneasy, as if they had stumbled into something they were never meant to see. And then the old man spoke again. "You are not safe here," he said. "You have to leave now." The passengers hesitated, unsure of what to do, but they knew that they couldn't stay there, not with the fog still out there, waiting for them. They thanked the old man and hurried out of the house, their hearts pounding with fear. They ran through the streets, trying to find a way out of Fearsome Falls, but the fog was everywhere, blocking their way and blinding them. As they stumbled through the mist, they heard strange noises coming from the darkness. It sounded like footsteps, but they couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, one of the passengers screamed. They had felt something brush against their leg, something slimy and cold. The others turned to see what had scared their companion, but they could see nothing. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows in the mist seemed to be closing in on them. The passengers knew that they were running out of time. Then they saw a light in the distance. It was faint, but it was there. They ran towards it, hoping that it was a way out of Fearsome Fall. As they got closer, they saw that it was a light. They could see the beam of light cutting through the fog, illuminating the path ahead. They ran towards the lights, their hearts pounding with hope. As they reached the door, they banged on it, hoping that someone would answer. The door creaked open, and an old man peered out at them. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gruff. "We need to get out of here," one of the passengers said. "The fog, it's everywhere." The old man nodded. "I know, I've been trapped here for years, but maybe there's a way out." He led them up the stairs of the lights to the top where the light was. He pointed out towards the horizon. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing towards a faint outline in the distance. The passengers squinted, trying to see through the fog. They saw a shape above. "That's your way out," the old man said. "The boat will take you away from Fearsome Falls. But you have to be quick. The fog won't give up that easily." The passengers thanked the old man and hurried down the stairs. They ran towards the boat, hoping that it would be their salvation. As they climbed aboard, they could feel the fog closing in around them, but they were determined to escape, to leave Fearsome Falls behind once and for all. The boat started to move, and the passengers could feel the relief wash over them. They were leaving Fearsome Falls, leaving the fog behind. But then they heard a sound. It was a whisper, a voice coming from the darkness. "You can never leave," the voice said. "You will always be mine." The passengers shuddered, knowing that they had not escaped the fog's grip. It had followed them onto the boat, and it would never let them go. They huddled together, knowing that they were trapped. The fog had claimed them, and there was nothing they could do. As the boat sailed into the distance, the passengers could see the outline of Fearsome Falls in the fog. They knew that they would never forget what had happened there, and they wondered if anyone would ever be able to escape the fog's curse. The Vanishing Village. Jenny and Mark had been traversing the length and breadth of the land, scouring every nook and cranny in search of a tranquil haven, a sanctuary where they could escape the cacophony of the city and bask in the serene stillness of the countryside. When they eventually chanced upon Fearsome Falls, their hearts were filled with euphoric anticipation, for it seemed as if their long quest had finally come to an end. The town appeared to be quaint, with charming stores and hospitable locals. However, as the sun slowly descended below the horizon and the mist gradually crept in, they began to perceive that something was amiss. The roads were barren, and the fog seemed denser than before. As they meandered through the haze, they espied eerie silhouettes flitting about in the shadows, their eyes emanating an ominous glow that pierced the gloom. When they endeavored to inquire about the unusual happenings from the townsfolk, they were met with reticence and apprehension. The locals seemed to be harboring something sinister and treacherous. As the couple pressed on, venturing deeper into the town, they realized that appearances could be deceiving. The buildings appeared decrepit and time-worn, and the citizens were living in a perpetual state of fear. One fateful night, while they were strolling through the fog, a blood-crushed shriek rent the air, causing their hearts to skip a beat. Following the sound, they trailed it to an abandoned alleyway and saw a figure disappear into the murky mist. Determined to unravel the mystery, they endeavored to leave the town, but every path they took led them back to Fearsome Falls. It seemed as if the town had been transformed into a chimerical labyrinth, ensnaring them in a terrifying nightmare to make it. As the fog thickened, the shadows moved ever closer until they were upon them. Jenny and Mark made a last-ditch attempt to escape, but it was in vain. Fearsome Falls had claimed them as its own, and they vanished without a trace. The story of their disappearance was shrouded in mystery, and no one knew what had befallen them or the others who had gone missing in Fearsome Falls. The town remained ensconced in an otherworldly fog, a haunting reminder of the terror that lurked within. Many years later, a group of researchers decided to visit Fearsome Falls to solve the riddle of its mysterious disappearance. However, as they entered the town, they were transported to an alternate realm, a world where the boundary between life and death was obscured by an impenetrable veil of darkness. As they ventured deeper into the abyssal depths of Fearsome Falls, they uncovered a malevolent history, one that was mired in the dark arts of witchcraft. The town had been established by a coven of witches who had used their arcane powers to summon a demon from the netherworld. In exchange for eternal life, the demon demanded human sacrifices, and the witches, blinded by their lust for immortality, agreed to its macabre demands. For centuries they had offered up the town's citizens to appease the demon's hunger, until it grew weary of its agreement and began demanding even more sacrifices, ultimately consuming the entire town. The researchers knew that they had to break the curse and liberate the trapped souls of Fearsome Falls. They delved deep into the town's dark history, poring over ancient tomes and consulting with local experts on the occult. Their research led them to a powerful ritual that could potentially banish the demon back to the other world and break the curse once and for all. It involved a complex series of incantations, sacrifices, and symbolic actions that had to be performed precisely and with utmost care. The researchers knew that the stakes were high, and any mistake could result in disastrous consequences, but they also knew that they had no other choice if they wanted to free the trapped souls and lift the curse from Fearsome Falls. They gathered all the knowledge they had acquired and began the ritual. The air crackled with energy as they recited the ancient incantations, and the ground shook with the force of their magical workings. As the ritual reached its climax, the demon appeared, its massive form towering over the researchers. Its eyes glowed with a fiery intensity, and its voice boomed with a sound like thunder. But the researchers were not intimidated. They stood their ground and continued with the ritual, channeling all their energy and focus into the task at hand. With a final burst of power, they unleashed a torrent of magic that engulfed the demon, sending it screaming back to the other world. The curse was broken, and the trapped souls were finally free. As the researchers emerged from the ritual, they saw that the fog had lifted, revealing a town that was no longer consumed by darkness and fear. The sun shone down upon Fearsome Falls, casting its light upon the restored buildings and the joyful faces of the townspeople. The curse had been broken, and the town was once again a place of peace and prosperity. The researchers packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, but not before they left behind a warning to never again dabble in the dark arts. Fearsome Falls had been saved, but its dark history would never be forgotten. It served as a reminder that the pursuit of power and immortality could lead to unspeakable horrors, and that sometimes the greatest magic of all was simply the courage to do what was right.